Welcome to the Fleet Geeks podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
Back in the room, mate.
Oh, I might back on it. That's yeah. There might be a trademark on that, so we've got to be careful saying things like that.
Oh yeah, come for us.
Yeah,
go on, do it. I'm not scared.
Yeah, they may have a bit more legal clout than we've got, though.
Yeah, I'm not scared. I say with a massive tongue in my cheek.
Talking about legal stuff, I think that's a really good segue into what we're going to talk about today, isn't it?
Mate, it's almost like you created that. It's almost like you created that.
Yeah, it was a fraudulent slip back on air.
We are the one, the only Fleet Geeks podcast.
We are the only Fleet Geeks.
The most popular fleet and transport related podcast.
I was making an oblique reference there to another podcast that may be out there that we don't want people to go to, although I'm sure they do a very good job. I listen to it, so it's no great.
There's plenty of listening time for all sorts of podcasts. Yeah, for everybody,
plenty to go around. But
we don't have competition in this industry.
No. And we'd love them to join in ours, and I'm sure we would be more than happy to go on one of theirs. So there we go. It's no rivalry in this game, is there? We're just in it to try to make people's lives a little bit easier.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
As it were. So that's segued in nicely there. I was going to sort of think that we should talk about the advice that people give and.
Yeah. So I have a saying. I have a bit of a saying, which I think will lead nicely into this. Free advice is worth every penny.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I had a lot of money for that advice, and all they told me. Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So we see this a lot, don't we? The face. And
there's no irony there. Actually, thinking about it, we're doing a free to access podcast.
Yes, we are doing a free to access podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to shush that irony. Actually,
talking about that, the other podcast that we may have made an oblique reference to, always starts with a bit of a disclaimer.
Yes,
and that disclaimer is that this is not meant as legal advice. We can only be. I'm paraphrasing, so we can only be general, and we can't give specific legal advice. This is not meant to be specific legal advice, and actually, they disclaim every podcast with that, which is probably not a bad thing. We ought to do that, really, aren't we? But and that's really led on to this. What you're going to sort of talk about in this podcast is how should people take advice? What about Facebook, Pete? You're more into it than I am. I'm fairly new to Facebook.
I love a bit of Facebook. Well, we sort of revert back to Facebook, and to be fair, LinkedIn's not getting much better. To be fair,
no, true.
People will go on to Facebook, and there's a multitude of transport manager groups. If you're not a member of one, the best one is the Fleet Geeks group, so please do join that. There's actually two. There's one for transport operators and one for transport managers. The transport managers one tends to be slightly more active. Please do come along, try it out. Other groups are available. And what happens is, in the other groups, not in ours, but in the other groups, is people will go on there and they'll ask for a bit of advice. And when people ask a genuinely interesting, what tends to happen is people will ask a genuinely interesting question like, what are people doing for their exhaust emissions tests at service, which is an intelligent question.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, there's very few comments.
Yes.
And then people will ask a ridiculous, often a ridiculous question, which is preceded by lots and lots of responses. It's one of those that there's a lot of contrary views, I think, on sometimes the posts that get multiple comments. And if you're one of those people that do wade in with I thought you'd passed your transport manager exam, you should know the answer, kindly fuck off. If you're one of those people, because I think we've got to learn that there's any question is a valid question. Absolutely. So on the Facebook groups, you've got people asking multiple questions, and there's often multiple responses, which are very wide and varied and very different in their responses.
Absolutely. I saw one just literally recently, before we came in to do this podcast, and somebody had asked a question about wanting to. They'd got a standard national licence, and they wanted to, if you like, downgrade, if that's the right word. That's not the right word, to be fair, but I'm saving the right word for in a minute for the answer. They wanted to downgrade to a restricted licence, and the advice that came back was surrender your standard national and apply for a new restricted licence. And that's just not the advice at all. That's not correct. They're varying their licence. They're going to vary their licence. I always have a saying, never surrender. If you've got an operator's licence, there is absolutely no reason to surrender it, no matter what you're doing with it. You're varying it. So vary the standard national to a restricted licence. It's odd. People don't normally do it that way. It normally goes the other way, from a restricted to a standard national. And the person came back and said to the person who gave the advice, thank you very much for, so how do we know now that person hasn't already typed the email out, surrendering their operator's licence, which is
dangerous, isn't it?
Dangerous, yeah.
Dangerous. And I've had a similar situation recently where I've helped a couple of times out of the goodness of my heart. He wanted to reduce his operator licence, the number of vehicles on his operator licence, and the RHA weren't able to help him. And he also wanted to change the entity of his operator licence from a partnership to a sole trader.
Happens quite regularly.
And again, RHA had struggled to help him with their membership helpline, which I think is absolutely fucking ludicrous. I'm sweary today, aren't I? Do apologise.
He has been up since 3:30.
I have been up since 3:30, and it is now, it's nearly 13 hours later as we record this.
Parental advisory.
Yeah, definitely parental advisory.
A long time.
Apologies. So I need to be less sweary. So I think you're absolutely right. Essentially, why would you give up if you've got all that good standing with having run an operator's licence to a good standard for several years? Why would you start from scratch again? I just find it ludicrous.
Particularly on a restricted licence, but when you've proved your mettle on a standard licence. So yes, it is strange. I don't know where that thread's going. There were no more responses from that as I just before we came in here. But just hope that person hasn't. Now the person who's given that advice has probably given it in best faith, in good faith.
Yeah, to the best of their knowledge.
It's just wrong. It's just simply wrong. And you often hear people on Facebook also asking for specific advice on specific issues, and it's always very difficult to give that just on the hoof, isn't it? Generalisations is not a problem. I can give, I'm happy to give general advice, but I think the important thing there is if you have specific issues, then speak to somebody who, not just on a Facebook post, but somebody who can really help you in terms of getting to grips with the context of your inquiry. So
just out of interest, then, if I go on Facebook and I ask the Facebook army of transport managers, I don't know, this driver has done this, what should I do? And I'll get a myriad of responses, but by and large, they're all saying sack him. I say him, it could be a her. Sack them. I go ahead and sack them. Is there any comeback for that advice that I've been given on Facebook?
Well, absolutely. Bloke on Facebook told me, when you're in front of an industrial employment tribunal, I still call them industrial tribunals, that was probably about 30 years ago, an employment tribunal, and the tribunal judge says, well, where did you get your advice from? Well, bloke on Facebook told me to sack them. Yeah. Where's that going to go, do you think?
Yeah. So I always treat social media, interestingly, I can't remember what book it was I read it in, but social media is like, you've given, like, the technical people, clever people who built the internet and then built these apps and things like that for social media, they've basically given the village idiot the opportunity to be able to say their piece to an equal standard. We used to have this thing called like natural selection, where what would happen is you'd have tribes of people, and over a period of time you'd have a hierarchy within the tribe.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks podcast.
Flagship Partners offer a range of consultancy and training services to ensure that our customers remain compliant and have the best possible knowledge to be able to fulfill their work. If you're interested in support with any of our safety, HR or compliance services, or you want to train to be a transport manager or need driver CPC training, give us a call today.
And you would have the people who potentially, offer the most value to the tribe, will have the most resounding voices.
Yes.
And their advice would be taken, and et cetera, et cetera. But the challenge you've got with social media is it could literally be Tom, Dick, or Harry. Telling you what you should do. So, but yeah, when is it? When you act upon the advice that's given, where do you stand? What is there any legal?
Well, in terms of the bloke from Facebook, absolutely no. So then, people will come and put their faith into consultants like our good selves, and we as a business would have to take out professional indemnity insurance. So, but I don't think we would ever give advice. We would never give advice without probably taking advice ourselves, because and even the people that we would go to for advice. So we're talking a different step. We're talking into people who are qualified in law. Still won't give you that advice, necessarily always, without the caveat that, of course, this is just simply advice. Only a court or a traffic commissioner, can really, really tell you whether a different judge or a different traffic commissioner on a different day might interpret the law in a slightly different way.
Okay, so that's really interesting. What you're saying is that in the same way that Tom, Dick, or Harry on Facebook will interpret their opinion in several different ways, and therefore the advice they give, in the same way, potentially the law. The regulator, I suppose, is the right way of putting it. I was going to say the lawmaker, but they're not the lawmaker. The regulator of the law, which is the TC,
yes,
can then make an interpretation, and you might see, Mr. Turfitt as the senior traffic commissioner in the east, and you might go and see Mr. Blackmore, the TC in the northeast, and the same situation may have two different outcomes based on the interpretation of the two traffic commissioners.
Based on how they've interpreted. Now, the regulator, in many ways, is more flexible than the lawmakers. They're more flexible than the courts, because the courts will work within a more sort of, not stricter, that's the wrong word really, but a tighter framework based on case law, etc. Whereas the regulators have it in their gift to sort of create that sort of interpretation, and they do that through the statutory documents. So
I was going to say that is the purpose and the role of the statutory documents. That's the purpose of the statutory documents. Yeah. So when you do give advice, if you steer people to the statutory documents and a passage or a part of the statutory documents, you can't tend to go too far wrong, can you? In the
interpretation, that's the current interpretation of the law, if you like, and that's how the traffic commissioners have read it. And if you read the statutory documents, which by and large are not that bad to read, I mean they're a little bit wordy, but they're reasonably straightforward to read. You'll notice that they always reference case law if there is any. So there is that sort of that way to it. But almost all cases there's little nuances and little slight differences, and really, ultimately it's down to how that is interpreted in a court of law or in front of a traffic commission. In fact, we've got a case recently that's I'm sort of leading myself down a blind alley really, because I can't remember the name of it now, but there's people might have heard recently of the traffic commissioner looking at all the vehicles that an operator owns as being needed to be authorised on the licence, whereas some operators may keep some vehicles off, so not off the road as such, but back from frontline operation. And I think there's been a judgment, or I say a judgment because they're not judges. There's been an interpretation recently from a traffic commissioner, and they may now look to change that guidance slightly. So it's that kind of thing. It's going to sound daft because I'm not being able to quote the actual case, am I? But that's the kind of thing you're looking for in terms of the best current advice would be to do X, Y, or Z. But as I say, I suppose we ought to caveat everything we say really with this is not specific legal advice, and every day's a school day. I'm learning something new every day, and
Absolutely. I think the podcast is here. I always intended the podcast not for me to be the expert, or for you to be the expert, or us to be the expert, so to speak. It's more about us raising things for people to think about and for them to consider, and
that's exactly
sharing the experience that we've had, which is good, and then asking awkward questions which then help our journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's very much what the podcast is. I think if people wanted advice, we are, as a business, the Flagship Partners business is professionally indemnified, but we're doing this as a Fleet Geeks podcast, and it's important, and I think that's a really good point actually. So the learning point from this, if you're listening and you are looking to offer advice as a consultancy or as a transport manager, as an external transport manager under your own steam, it's very important to make sure that you're properly got professional indemnity insurance that covers the activities that take place and that you carry out, and that professional indemnity will be different depending on whether you're a training company or whether you're an external transport manager or whether you're a transport consultant. They're all slightly different activities with different levels of risk, and an insurance company or an insurance broker will be able to offer you professional indemnity. I think we're indemnified up to like £5 million, and usually it's based on the size of the business which you support or give advice to. So a lot of people who do transport consultancy work, they might do slightly less. They might go to £1 or £2 million, or even £500,000 of professional indemnity, depending on the size of the operation that they work with. We work with some quite large national players, so therefore we need to make sure that we've got higher levels of professional indemnity, because it may have a bigger impact potentially on a bigger business. So, but yeah, I think that's my key point. And like you say, it's very interesting thinking about how ultimately any advice is essentially someone's interpretation,
and right down to the legal beagles who are much closer to the lawmaking process than we are. But yeah, interesting thoughts, folks. So yes, don't necessarily listen to Frank from Facebook.
Frank from Facebook. What are we going to call this podcast, Mike? I haven't stopped the recording yet. What are we going to call it?
I don't know.
I've seen you've written down on your sheet of paper, law or not advice.
Law or not.
I don't.
It's not very exciting, is it? We'll have to think about
what even is legal advice.
We quite often do these. What even is legal advice? I like that. What even is legal advice?
What even is? So we've talked, and then we've come up with a question.
That's how we roll, isn't it? we do the podcast, and then think, what should we call it? Oh, I don't know. It's sometimes like that with training courses. You have an idea for a training course, and you put I know what I want to get across. I know the things I want to cover, but I haven't really got a name.
We knew the learning objective, so we knew the learning objective was that we wanted people to learn that legal advice is essentially just that. It's advice. It's an interpretation. And that free advice is often worth every penny. They're the key learning points of this session, and sometimes the cool title comes at the end.
Absolutely, and that's the cool title, I think.
Yeah.
What even is legal advice?
What even is legal advice? Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, folks. See you on the next one.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.